Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the kind introduction. So I'm Mary Grove. I'm the managing partner at Bread and Butter Ventures, based here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I'm so honored to be with you here today. And congratulations on a beautiful production, especially in today's virtual world, and also on an amazing lineup of speakers. I'm very honored to be included. So I just wanted to say that this is a momentous moment for me because almost exactly 10 years ago to the day was my first trip to Pakistan when I first met Jehan Ara there. And I immediately was struck by both her leadership, and more broadly, the opportunities in the ecosystem there for Pakistan to really be just a global leader in entrepreneurship and innovation. So it is very appropriate that a decade later, I get to return virtually to be with you. So I am here today to talk about why I think entrepreneurship and supporting entrepreneurs, is frankly the most important opportunity of our lifetime. And just to give you some personal background and introduction. So my background is mainly in tech and early stage investing. However, my first really lens of entrepreneurship came through my family. So my parents were immigrants from Thailand to the US. They came from remote villages without electricity and came to the US in search of the quintessential American dream. They were themselves great entrepreneurs who started and ran small businesses together for over 30 years. They raised 3 children and really instilled in my siblings and me this incredible work ethic and the tenacity, the grit that was required. I got to grow up seeing both the failures and success that entrepreneurship requires, which was such a gift. And then from there, I went to Stanford University to study my both undergrad and grad degrees. And I sort of accidentally ended up in tech because I was living in the backyard of Silicon Valley. And so I ended up starting my career at Google, where I thought I was going to go for 1 year on the way to law school. But 15 years later, I was still there. And so I had the great opportunity to work on the company's IPO deal team the year that Google went public in 2004. I worked on early stage product partnerships and business development for about 6 years. And then my last 6 years was a very special chapter where I had the privilege of starting what was then called the Google for Entrepreneurs team. Today is called Google for Startups and is really Google's umbrella for supporting both startups at the early stage directly, but equally important, supporting at the ecosystem level, partners and players like the Nest who are really having that true impact on the ground. And so we built a network of more than 50 global partner organizations who collectively reached more than 400,000 entrepreneurs. And I have so many learnings that I've taken with me from that era. And it really convinced me of 2 things. One is that working with entrepreneurs at the early stage is the most magical opportunity and the most fun stage for me personally. And secondly, it's not just about Silicon Valley and it's not just happening there. There's a lot we can learn from the Valley, but it's a global phenomenon. So with that in mind, in 2018, I moved to Minnesota. My husband, Steve, is a proud Minnesota native, and we have a very large family footprint in the Midwest, but it was a great alignment of personal and professional opportunity. So personally, we wanted to raise our young children. We have 4-year-old, soon to be 4-year-old twins, who you may see here any minute, and be a part of the community here. But equally important, invest outside of the coasts. And so 3 years ago, I began the next chapter of my career as a venture capital investor. I was a partner at Steve Case's firm Revolution on the Rise the Rest seed fund for a couple of years. And then earlier this year have gone out to help build a new firm here in Minnesota called Bread and Butter Ventures. And so I encourage you to look us up online, Bread and Butter Ventures. We are early stage investing globally, but specifically in sectors that map to the strengths of Minnesota's backyard. And those are specifically food technology, health technology, and enterprise software. And so that's what I'm doing now. And I'm just super excited to be able to dedicate the next chapter of my career to finding, backing, supporting, and helping scale amazing world-class companies all over the world. So with that in mind, I'd love to cover two core topics. The first is, my observations that I've learned over the last 2 decades on why supporting entrepreneurs matters. Number one is that the best founders that I've met and worked with are fundamentally solving a problem that they personally have, and that in fact millions or even billions of people may have as well. And I've seen that through and through in the entrepreneurs I've met from the Pakistani ecosystem, which is that the opportunity that you have to build products and services and businesses that impact millions and billions of people at scale from day one is a pretty extraordinary opportunity set. And so one is that, fundamentally you're solving real world problems that you also have. The second observation is that the biggest challenges I believe we face as a society and as a global, community now and moving forward will be solved by entrepreneurs. They will be solved by startups who are innovating through technology-driven approaches. And so those are the two reasons why I think it's fundamentally critical that we all do our part to support startups, to support a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. And the question then becomes, what can I do? What can you do to support entrepreneurs? Well, one, if you're a successful entrepreneur, like many we've seen throughout the event today, the best thing you can do is pay it forward. Can you mentor? Can you offer advice? Can you help other companies to create that next generation of startup success? If you're an investor, a venture capital investor, obviously one of the most important things you can do is actually write checks and help fund great companies. But even before that, can you go the extra mile to take the meeting, to build those relationships, to help mentor companies, essentially to help build that pipeline of companies who would be ready at the next stage for investment? And it takes a lot of time and effort to do that, but that's the role that I believe investors can play. If you are a corporation or a large enterprise, your role could be to partner with startups, to buy from them, purchase from them as suppliers, to actually give them an opportunity to navigate a large enterprise and take an early bet on a startup. Look in your own backyard to start, for example. And corporations can also play a large role in supporting innovation financially, whether it's sponsoring a local event, sponsoring an accelerator program, creating your own accelerator program. But it's all about bridging that gap between industry and between these small early stage companies. If you are in government, in the public sector, at any level, what can you do to be supporting and curating a regulatory environment, policies that make it easy to both start but also sunset a business if it doesn't work? What incentives can you provide to attract and retain entrepreneurs into your ecosystem? Think creatively about grants programs or matching programs. If you're an ecosystem builder like Jahan is, how can you think creatively about building an inclusive ecosystem that is accessible to all, and think about, bringing in mentors both from your own ecosystem, but across the country and really across the world to support those entrepreneurs. And then lastly, if you are an entrepreneur, of course, which many of you are today who are tuning in, I wanted to share my advice for entrepreneurs in this room. The first is really to lean into your place and your home field advantage. And so oftentimes I think that we become fixated on replicating Silicon Valley. And I think it's not about recreating Silicon Valley. It's about leaning into the assets of your backyard. So for me at this moment in Minnesota, for example, I am building and helping build a fund that is linked to our backyard. So we excel globally in healthcare, we excel in food tech and ag tech, and we excel in enterprise, right? Minnesota has the highest number of Fortune 500 companies per capita in the United States. So that's an example of lean into your home field advantage. My second piece of advice is to launch quickly and iterate often, meaning if you have a startup, get feedback, particularly from users, customers, or potential customers as soon as possible, because the worst thing we can do is be building in stealth mode for 2 or 3 years when we could have gotten the feedback right away that could help us really pivot quickly and build something transformational. And my third tidbit is to prioritize building team and culture from day one. It is the most important building blocks of a successful startup, is that culture, that team, and prioritize caring for yourself as a founder too, and your life holistically. The fourth thing is to ask yourself what type of company you're building, and then what's the right way to capitalize or fund that business. And the answer isn't always venture capital. I think that a lot of times we think that I'm building a startup, I need VC funding. Perhaps actually a loan or a grant or a non-dilutive grant. There are multiple ways to think about funding a company. The question is VC right for me? And then if you do decide to go down that path, make sure you do your diligence and homework on your investors too, and who you want to sort of join into your cap table and into the trenches with you. Last two pieces of advice. One is to be bold, to find mentors. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I think one of the greatest lessons in leadership I've learned is about being authentic and vulnerable and not being afraid to ask for help, because that is truly, I think, what separates the best founders and CEOs from everyone else. And lastly is just the role of nurturing relationships and partnerships, which are long-term. And, even if an investor isn't the right fit for this round, or it's too early for you to be partnering with corporation X, Y, or Z, it is really a long-term game. And so thinking about building those relationships, updating people, not taking offense when the answer is no, not taking it personally, and developing that long-term rapport. So those are my thoughts on, fundamentally what we all as an ecosystem can do to help ensure that entrepreneurs are successful. But I'll just close by saying, I know that it's been a tremendously difficult world in the year 2020 with the global pandemic. And I am just awestruck every day by the amount of innovation, the amount of new companies forming that I'm seeing, the amount of new ideas, but also the ways that existing entrepreneurs and startups are really pivoting and doing amazing things. And so my last thought is that I just want to encourage you to keep going, keep pushing, and remind yourself that many of the greatest unicorns in the history of the tech industry were born specifically in periods of economic recession, right? It's this idea that constraint breeds creativity, and that can actually help us bootstrap and innovate more quickly. So keep going. Thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor, and I would love to take any questions if there are.
Hi, Mary. Good to
Hello.
see you.
Hi, Jahan.
How are you?
I am wonderful. How are you? I love the beautiful setup of the stage and everything.
Yeah, I wish you could be here in person. But I have a few questions for you. You were in Silicon Valley and you helped so many of our partner organizations to grow our ecosystems across the world, many in emerging economies like Pakistan, like in African countries, in the Middle East. So now you've moved to a different part of the US, in Minnesota. Are the challenges the same that you remember people like us having? How are the challenges different? How are people tackling them? It'd be interesting to hear.
Sure. There are a lot of similarities in the sense that, I like being in Minnesota because I sort of feel like the underdog, in a sense, right? Where a lot of eyes have been on Silicon Valley or coastal cities. But I believe, much like I believe in emerging markets as well, that we actually have the edge, we have the advantage, we have the proximity to the actual problems that we're trying to solve. And with Pakistan, for example, just the sheer amount of scale that you have to address with the population alone. I mean, it's an order of magnitude higher than some of these markets that are launching the apps and the services that get a lot of the attention. So I think some of the challenges are universal, right? In that you're overlooked at times from a resource perspective, but you actually are close to the problems that are being solved. And so, but I would say that I'm seeing a huge trend in the distribution of talent now. People are leaving the major cities, and I think we will no longer return to life as it was at the beginning of 2020 after this year. And I think that's a great thing. And I would like to say that, you and hopefully me and others who've been seeing this trend and knowing that we can innovate not just in the epicenter of Silicon Valley, but I am seeing a lot of new companies being born right now, especially in the industries of, supply chain, logistics, the future of work, healthcare in general, food tech and ag tech, and how we feed each other, how we feed ourselves, how we care for each other, and how we work.
Great. So, Mary, you had twins while you were still at Google. And what kind of life work challenges did you face, and how did you cope with them? Because we saw you coping with them so brilliantly. And the twins are now 4 years old, and I'm sure the challenges are very different. But how did you manage to balance work and life? Because there are a lot of women now starting their own businesses or taking leadership roles at companies. And I think the lessons that you learned would help them.
Thank you. Yes, it was a great transition for me. We had boy-girl twins 4 years ago, as you said, and I think one biggest lesson for me at the time, I was leading the Google for Startups team. We were about 40 people around the world. The team was 2/3 women, and in the time that I was the director there, we had 9 babies born, amongst us, both across moms and dads. And the number one thing that I found was just being completely open, transparent, and setting my boundaries in a way such that established the culture and the baseline tone. I was one of the earlier ones to have children. And so the understanding that when we have parental leave, we will take it, we will delegate, we will cover for each other, we will unapologetically, we work in tech, right? So we don't need to be at the desk for specific hours of the day. It's okay to have this where we go home, we have time with our families. I still today log on, my most productive hours are between 8:30 p.m. and 11 p.m., as is the rest of our team, because we are in the same sort of boat in life. So I think that's the number one lesson, is be authentic, set boundaries, set healthy boundaries, and be unapologetic about it. And the second is just understanding what support system to put around you. And we were living in California. I have an amazing husband who's also very, very career focused, but he has been an equal partner. And I say, I'm such a strong advocate for paid family leave for men and women both, because in my mind, I certainly couldn't have done it without a supportive partner who also had the resources vis-a-vis leave and whatnot to make it work. And so, but I think it's just about normalizing it, talking about it, demanding, and create, especially if you're the founder, to set that tone for your company and your team and give everybody permission to follow suit.
Yeah, Steve is amazing. I agree with you. And we could all see that he was an equal partner in bringing up the twins. There's a question from Jawad Farid, who's my partner in crime at The Nest. He says, given the role that you played at the start of this adventure of the Nest.io, did you ever think we and the ecosystem would come this far?
I'm not surprised one bit, and I'm not, early on, the Google for Entrepreneurs model, it's analogous to venture capital, right? Which is my focus now. It's you find great partners and you back them financially, and you make an early bet. So to me, the Nest was essentially a seed bet, right? And now you've scaled, and because when you invest early, as any early stage investor will tell you, it's about the founder. So it was about you, right? And it was about seeing that your vision, your accomplishments, and your commitment were not going to change. And I knew that the strategy may change, the programming itself may change, the product, so to speak, may change, but with the right leadership at the helm and the ability to command partnerships and respect globally, which you so have in spades. But that said, it's been a pleasure to follow the innovation through the last decade. And of course, I've always believed, but I believe that, the next decade will hold even bigger things for the Nest community under your leadership.
Thank you so much, Mary. We have to stop now, but we'll keep in touch and hope to see you soon in person.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.